In this respect, we do not even have a single research institute in Kazakhstan.
The fact that Kazakhstan is planning to launch a referendum for constructing a power plant is closely followed,
which is connected both with the demographic issue.
Do you know where and when the first referendum on nuclear power plants was held? In Austria, November 5, 1978. The news about the construction of a nuclear power plant did not greatly please the people, and mass protests began in the country. The authorities decided to hold a referendum. As a result, 1,576,839 Austrians voted for the construction of the facility. Another 1,606,308 residents did not support this initiative. However, the sixth nuclear power plant was built in Austria. An important event will also affect Kazakhstan. We are talking about the upcoming referendum on the construction of a nuclear power plant, which will be a key moment in determining the will of every resident of our country. Me and my foreign colleagues tried to understand this topic. There is no nuclear power plant in Azerbaijan. This initiative was announced by the government almost half a century ago. However, the country cannot take the first step. For many years, the issue of constructing a nuclear power plant remains relevant and causes numerous discussions. My colleague from Azerbaijan, Kamila Jabarova, tried to find out the reason for the authorities' indecisiveness.
Azerbaijan has long been studying the possibilities of developing nuclear energy, as well as using peaceful atoms for scientific purposes. Back in 1980, the foundation of a nuclear power plant was laid in the village of Navai, but the implementation of this project for some reason was delayed and was completely frozen after the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Whether the project will be implemented or not, only time will tell us.
Does Azerbaijan need a nuclear power plant? I would say no. I don't live in Kazakhstan, in the steppe zone. I live in Azerbaijan, which is surrounded by mountains and the sea. Our country is located 28 meters below the world's ocean level, the lowest. It rains, snows and hails here. 3 main rivers flow through Azerbaijan. The rest are small. And if you combine several small rivers, you can get a huge source of water, which will have a positive impact on the economy. At the same time, we should not forget that South Caucasus is a seismic zone. Radiation leakage from a nuclear power plant during an earthquake is inevitable. This can lead to serious environmental and economic consequences. Damage tens of thousands of hectares of fertile agricultural land, as well as lead to the destruction of biodiversity of the entire region. To build a nuclear power plant in the country, several conditions are required. In the middle of last century, only those countries that did not have natural resources, neither oil, nor gas, nor coal, were interested in nuclear power plants. As a result, as an alternative energy, nuclear power plants significantly justify themselves. The second point is that the territory of such countries is spacious. Moreover, such countries also have huge reserves of water, since large amounts of water are needed to cool nuclear reactors. In steppe countries like Kazakhstan, where there is not enough water, which means water must be created, and therefore there must be energy. Everything, as you can see, is expensive. Azerbaijan is fully self-sufficient in electricity for 2-3 years already. Azerbaijan has been exporting 3 billion square meters. Our largest gas importers are Turkey, Georgia, Russia, and Iran. After the peace treaty is signed, perhaps the same will happen with Armenia. To generate 1,000 megawatts of electricity, it costs $700 to $800 million to run it on gas. And to generate 1,000 megawatts of electricity at a nuclear power plant, the minimum capital cost is $1 billion. It is necessary to take into account the training of personnel. A minimum of about 7 years is required. If the construction of a nuclear power plant of 1,000 megawatts will cost Azerbaijan $10 billion, then the construction of a power plant costs a maximum of 1 billion minutes. Azerbaijan does not need a nuclear power plant.
Today, Azerbaijan exports electricity to countries such as Greece, Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary. During the years of independence, 28 new power plants were built in the state, which increased the capacity potential by 3,068 megawatts. Today, there are 22 large thermal and 30 hydroelectric power plants. However, the country, recognized as the most economically developed in the South Caucasus, cannot afford to sell light to other countries. This is due to the fact that recently power in Azerbaijan has been growing, but production has been falling. For example, in 2010, the Azerbaijani hydroelectric power station produced 3.5 billion kilowatt-hours of energy. Its share in the total energy balance was 18.4%. Meanwhile, last year this figure barely reached 2.68%.
I can say with confidence that in the nearest future, from the point of view of a shortage of energy resources in the country, including risks in the economic sphere, no shortages are expected. Already today we see that even in the conditions of a pronounced raw material orientation of the domestic economy, the demand for energy resources within the country is growing sharply, which is connected both with the demographic issue and with the fact that projects and programs are being implemented in Azerbaijan for the development of high-tech processing industries. All this will lead to the fact that the demand for energy resources is increasing, despite the fact that the new directions of technological development of the Republic are more energy-efficient technologies. Azerbaijan will need to increase the energy intensity of the economy for a long time, and the demand for electricity will certainly increase. In this context, Azerbaijan should not remain completely aloof from this process, of course, in compliance with all advanced safety standards.
Let's get the basics out of the way first. What is a nuclear power plant? In simple terms, this is a very, very powerful steam engine. The reactor heats the water turns into steam, the steam rotates a turbine with a generator, and condenses back into water. I note that conventional thermal power plants operate on the same principle, only at nuclear power plants, instead of coal, gas, fuel oil, wood, uranium pellets are used. It takes about 60 months to build a nuclear power plant. It takes 1 year to create each power unit. The service life is 60 years, but it can be extended. That is, it is assumed that the station will generate net profit for about 40 years. Kyrgyzstan has declared a 3-year state of emergency due to energy shortages. The reasons are a decrease in output at hydroelectric power plants due to low water levels, deterioration of generation, and a sharp increase in demand for electricity. The state of emergency, judging by the statement of the Republican authorities, will allow land plots to be allocated for the construction of green generation in a short time. Kyrgyzstan has little choice. The country can start building hydroelectric or nuclear power plants, analysts say. But 3 years is not enough for this. Last year, the country's government allocated land for the construction of a plant for processing green generation. But this time, for the construction of a nuclear power plant or the same hydroelectric power station is too little, experts say. The situation in Kyrgyzstan is getting worse every year. In the middle of winter last year, the thermal power plant failed. The result is that dozens of houses in Bishkek were left without heat and light. Moreover, 80% of the country's energy infrastructure is in dilapidated condition. All this led to an annual electricity shortage of 6 billion kilowatts per hour. Today in Kyrgyzstan, electricity prices have been increased, and the supply of electricity has been limited to a number of industries.
After gaining independence, Kyrgyzstan made a big bet on the development of local energy. However, due to explosive population growth, lack of water resources, and deteriorating networks, the country has been facing energy shortages for 15 years. At the end of last year, this deficit amounted to almost 3.2 billion kilowatt-hours. This leads to the need to purchase electricity from neighbors and search for additional energy sources.
In fact, there is a need to build a nuclear power plant because there is not enough energy in Kyrgyzstan. I believe that we need to reduce generation and create nuclear power plants and other energy. In fact, nuclear technology brings us some negative emotions because there is the Chernobyl disaster. Our Kyrgyz grandfathers visited there and saw the horror with their own eyes. There is also the Fukushima incident in 2015. Because of the tragic events in our country, people began to treat the NPP negatively. However, you need to understand that new nuclear power plants are designed with modern technologies in mind, so I think they are less harmful than before. The Chernobyl accident that happened in 1953 affected the lives of all Soviet countries, and we also had a hard time. In fact, it would be better if the electricity came from us, because our water resources are widely available. We have full capacity to produce products, at least for ourselves. I would like to note that the authorities are investing.
The authorities of Kyrgyzstan are making efforts to solve the problem of energy shortage, including the construction of small hydroelectric power stations, solar and wind stations. However, it is obvious that without the construction of large energy facilities, it is impossible to completely overcome the growing shortage of electricity. Nuclear power plants could be a solution, freeing the country from dependence on seasonal glacier melt and providing critical water resources for communities to irrigate farmland.
However, for some countries, nuclear energy has long ceased to be something new and unknown. For example, in Russia, there are 11 nuclear power plants with 38 power units. My colleague in this country, Kirill Krivosheyev, interviewed a radioactive waste safety specialist.
Against the backdrop of a general decline in Russia's influence in the post-Soviet space after the start of the war in Ukraine, the state corporation ROSATOM seems to be still doing well in the international market. Right now, the construction of Russian nuclear power plants is being discussed in 3 Central Asian states: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Construction continues in Turkey and Egypt. Last year, the first batch of nuclear fuel was delivered to a Russian nuclear power plant in Bangladesh. In neighboring India, a nuclear power plant has been operating for a long time, but a new power unit is expected to be launched. ROSATOM also has its own plans for Africa, primarily South Africa, where a tender has been announced for the construction of a new nuclear power plant. An innovative floating nuclear power plant project is also being considered in Africa. It seems that the work is going uphill and bringing in billions of dollars. But is this really so? In all 3 Central Asian republics, the construction of nuclear power plants, and even more so, the construction of nuclear power plants by ROSATOM, at least raises questions. And therefore, in Kazakhstan, they even decided to hold a referendum. But opponents of nuclear power plants are often called opponents of progress in general. They are put on a par with those who, during the pandemic, refused to administer vaccines and destroyed 5G towers. But how true is the slogan, NPP equals a progress? Or is it just propaganda? Are there reasonable alternatives to nuclear power that could meet the demands of environmentalists and still provide the power needed by modern industry? We decided to talk about this with Andrey Ozharovsky, a physics engineer and an expert in the radioactive waste safety program. And many of the things he said surprised us.
Zero One ROSATOM is responsible for both the peaceful and military part of the nuclear industry. Therefore, it receives government subsidies. ROSATOM's international activities, again, if we take only the economy, are based on access to financial states with very serious resources. I can give you an example. The Belarusian nuclear power plant was built with delays and breakdowns, and it doesn't work very well there. The indicators are disgusting. 50% of the time the nuclear power plant is idle, but nevertheless, it was completed and it was built at Russian expense. Belarus agreed that this is some kind of loan that Lukashenko may someday repay, or maybe not. We know that Russia often forgives his loans. But there is no business or economic benefit behind this, at least for Russia. Turkey is a wonderful example. Turkey in principle refused to participate economically in financing the Akkuyu nuclear power plant. There are also device scandals there. But the Turks do not want to invest more than 1 Turkish lira or 1 American dollar there. Why? Because when ROSATOM came with this proposal, bought the calculations, the Turkish side checked them, and turned out the electricity should cost approximately 12 US cents per kilowatt hour of electricity produced non the consumer, but directly produced by nuclear plant itself. But I understand that the Turkish side will not fulfill an agreement that is unfavorable for itself. And it turned out the ROSATOM built a nuclear power plant in Turkey at its own peril and risk, more precisely at our peril and the risk of the Russians, since all financial risks and the risk associated with the possible accidents and the radioactive waste belong to the Russian side.
When it comes to nuclear energy, the idea of asking people who don't have a technical background doesn't seem to be a popular idea. Defenders of nuclear energy can always make the argument that ordinary people are simply incompetent in such a complex issue, which means that any polls or referendums are meaningless. Meanwhile, the president of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, promised the people to hold a referendum on the construction of a nuclear power plant. And our interlocutor, Andrey Ozharovsky, considers this the correct idea, if only for the sake of starting a national discussion, during which arguments from both sides will be heard.
This is exactly what ROSATOM will offer if, as in Belarus, Russia pays 90% and that we will either write off the debts or pay back a little. So, yes, at this specific point for the specific country for the buyer recipient of these services, this may seem attractive. But we must understand that behind this comes technological dependence. But the first is the simplest, dependence on fuel suppliers. A nuclear power plant cannot work like that. We need a fuel production plant. We need a fuel enrichment. All this paramilitary stuff, especially enrichment under international control. And imagine that either Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan will build a fuel fabrication plant. There are such promises, but I don't think that this is possible. Plus, it's quite expensive to build a plant like this from scratch. This means there will be supplies of Russian energy resources. This is the first dependence. The second dependence is technological. Imagine that you can teach an engineer from Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, Belarus, to be a technician, an operator at nuclear power plant. It may well be, but this is not a big problem. But the technology is actually Russian, and in this case, of a slightly more complex operation than just reloading fuel. God forbid something breaks, and this happens quite regularly. If modernization is required, it will still tie those customers who want to buy the ROSATOM power unit to a single supplier, i.e. to Russia. Whether this is used as a political weapon or not is a question for political scientists. I am a physicist and observer, but I see, for example, Hungary did not recognize in time its increased dependence on ROSATOM, and to what extent. It is political now.
There are no existing commercial nuclear reactors in the Turkish Republic yet. However, 4 VVER 1200 reactors are currently under construction at the Akkuyu nuclear power plant. While work at the facilities has not been completed, the government has ambitious plans to reach 20 gigawatt of nuclear energy in the next 5 years.
Russia and Turkey agreed to build the Akkuyu nuclear power plant in 2010. This nuclear power plant is the first in the Turkish Republic, which is being built according to the principle build, own, operate. This means that Turkey provided the site for the construction of the nuclear power plant, and Russia assumed obligations for the design, construction, operation and maintenance of the nuclear power plant, and Moscow is also responsible for the expenses and risks.
This new power plant will provide electricity to more than 12 million people in Turkey in 10 different provinces. This new power plant will produce around 10% of Turkey's electricity needs in the coming decades. In overall explanation, with this move, Turkey will change a lot of dynamics in its energy policies, creating its own technology and its own nuclear resources on its soils. So that's why it is going to be a very important step for Turkey. For example, Turkey is also planning to build second and third nuclear power plants in the coming decades. And recent talks between Turkey and United States have resulted in cooperation in the field of supplying Turkey small modular reactors that the United States has been developing for some time. These small modular reactors are very well technologically advanced and can generate electricity and some other resources for different purposes in the coming future of Turkey. This is going to take Turkey into the league of countries who are using nuclear energy in a peaceful way. So this will be a first step for Turkey to become a country into the league of nuclear energy.
There should be 4 power units in Akkuyu. Construction of the first power unit on the Mediterranean coast in Mersin began after 8 years of signing the agreement, that is, in 2018, due to local bureaucracy and problems in relations between Russia and Turkey. In 2023, Russian nuclear fuel was delivered to the Akkuyu nuclear power plant. In 2025, it is planned to be used. All the project must be ready by 2026. The project costs are $20 billion. Its capacity after the launch of all power units is estimated at 4,800 megawatts. The construction of a nuclear power plant is very important for Turkey because the country doesn't have its own hydrocarbon resources. That is why it has to import over 90% of gas and oil and purchase 72% of the energy consumed. The Akkuyu nuclear power plant is expected to cover about 10% of the country's electricity needs.
Turkey had been mulling starting using nuclear power for peaceful ways for at least 20 years. During all these periods, Turkey had negotiated with different countries, including Japan, South Korea, and some other Western countries who are having this technology. But at the end of the day, the best offer has come from Russia. As I said, this power plant will serve Turkey around 60 years, and with additional 20 years, that means we will need at least 2 or 3 generations of experts. So this is very important that Turkey is training its own experts with the help of Russia.
The Turkish media has criticized the fact that the authorities made the decision to build a nuclear power plant without public discussion of the project, without a referendum justifying the need for the construction of a nuclear power plant solely on the national interests of the country. Turkish society was afraid that in the case, Russia's influence would increase and Turkey would lose its independence.
The fact that Kazakhstan is planning to launch a referendum for constructing a power plant is closely followed, because Kazakhstan is a very important country with its uranium and other nuclear fuel components. It is owning large reserves, and any country in the world who wants to start nuclear power energy facility should be in contact with Kazakhstan. So Turkey is also closely following the intentions of Kazakhstan for entering into this area. Also, as far as I know, Kazakhstan is also closely following the construction of Akkuyu nuclear power plant in Turkey, because it may be a kind of an example for them if a referendum to be held in the coming period would approve the Kazakh government intentions to build a power plant. So in this sense, as far as I know, a team from Kazakhstan, an expert team, has visited the site, the construction site in Akkuyu, and has also taken notes from this experience Turkey is having.
Yes, negotiations recently took place between Turkey and the United States. As a result, small American modular reactors were supplied to the fraternal country. Modern modulator reactor technologies will soon be able to produce electricity and other resources for a variety of purposes. It is worth noting that Turkey cooperates not only with Russia, but also with South Korea. In the future, they plan to build a second and third nuclear power plant. If we talk about the impact of a nuclear power plant on the environment, then today there is not a single facility in the world that produces 100% environmentally friendly energy. Considering that resources for the construction of any power plant are extracted from the subsoil, it is obvious that the environment will suffer some damage. In addition, we must not forget about such problems as radioactive contamination during the operation of nuclear power plants and the need to consume a significant amount of water to cool reactors. But every day, the lack of energy is becoming an increasingly acute problem. The weakness of electricity in the country was especially pronounced during floods. Can this nuclear power plant develop green energy? Will a nuclear power plant lead Kazakhstan out of the energy crisis? And I wanted to get answers to other questions. So, how should the construction of a nuclear power plant be carried out? We will be answered by an academician, a doctor of technical sciences, Professor Sakhi Duisen Sakhi. Duisen Sakhi, thank you for agreeing to give us an interview. So, let's start with the questions. What criteria, what technical regulations should be observed when constructing a nuclear power plant?
The construction of any object is necessary. First of all, we need to know what we are going to build. The question is, what is the purpose of the object? You say that the construction of a nuclear power plant is for Kazakhstan's science, in fact, not a research area. In this respect, we do not even have a single research institute in Kazakhstan. Of course, there are research institutes of nuclear physics, but they are engaged in a completely different direction. Therefore, we are purely in need of future specialists who could work in this direction of nuclear energy. And this is a very relevant issue for Kazakhstan. In this regard, our parliament and some of our deputies have been raising this issue for quite some time. Of course, you see for yourself that it is very good that we have wind, sun, and water in Kazakhstan. These are the three elements that we need to get the electricity we need. There are enough of them in our Kazakhstan. You can use it not only in Kazakhstan, but also in Shymkent, Taraz, and in Almaty. We even have wind from all sides in Astana. You can use it, but to use it, you need a specialist. Today, not a single Kazakhstani university has a specialist in this field. But, as you know, this is a very relevant issue, and I hope that our Ministry of Education will take this issue into their hands, and we will probably start moving forward. First, we need to prepare a specialist. To prepare a specialist, you need either a college, a technician, or a higher education institution where there are specialists who can teach them and prepare the necessary specialists. This issue is already very important to us.
We all know that the issue of the construction of the NPP will be brought to a national referendum. In turn, we also learn the opinion of the residents. Let's listen together.
I think we don't need it for sure. I think it will be superfluous. It will affect the ecology in the first place.
We haven't heard anything. We came from Russia, from Perm. We have nuclear power plants, and they operate normally. Therefore, with the compliance of safety equipment, I think everything will be fine. Probably, this should be decided by the population, first of all, by Kazakhstan, whether they need it or not. Maybe this issue is appropriate to be brought to some referendum. Yes, there were certain problems with Chernobyl, with Fukushima. As far as I know, there is nothing like that recently. But probably economic purposefulness is still important. That is, if there is enough energy, then you need it for export or internal consumption. Therefore, it is up to you to decide.
Probably. This is not very useful, but probably necessary. That is, you need to get acquainted with more information. Now, I cannot say specifically whether I am for or against it.
It will probably take 4 or even 5 years to train specialists who will discuss the NPP if it is built in Kazakhstan. The fact that Kazakhstan is a uranium power and needs personnel was mentioned earlier. However, this issue remains unresolved. By the way, the government should also think about how to return to the country experienced Kazakhstanis who once went to study abroad and stayed to work there. Meanwhile, the implementation of a large-scale project has the potential to influence the strengthening of cooperation between Kazakhstan and other Turkic countries, says expert Kunzadash Sattykova. Within the framework of the project, joint training programs, exchange of specialists, as well as consultations on safety and operation are possible.
Yes, the NPP will be competitive, especially since our old stations are outdated. The CHP plants worked in the basic mode schedule of electricity consumption. If we build and put into operation, this NPP will displace the old unreliable ones from the basic mode, which stop endlessly in emergency mode, and it will replace these stations. In this regard, it will be the main component of the electricity consumption schedule and will be a very reliable source of electricity generation in Kazakhstan. Uzbekistan has agreed with Russia on the construction of a nuclear power plant based on small-sized nuclear reactors. It's good, but if they get ahead and quickly build and put into operation, then in the Central Asian region, they will command in terms of energy security and stable electricity supply, because they will have an excess of electricity, and we will buy from them. We have a connection on electricity with Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and all the republics we have a connection with. In difficult moments, we help out if, where the accident happened, it affects us too. For example, if an accident happened in Uzbekistan, it also affects us. We are interconnected from and to. Our electricity crosses through Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, to Afghanistan, Pakistan. Therefore, all these Turkic states of ours are interconnected. They say that we will establish communication with Azerbaijan through the Caspian Sea and pull the cable line. But this is a project of the future. The memorandum has already been signed. Minister Sattykova has signed it. I've already read it in the media. Therefore, the construction and commissioning of nuclear power plants, firstly, is a stable supply of electricity, and in difficult times, we must help each other out. This will contribute to our cooperation in the region.
Who will build nuclear power plants in Kazakhstan also remains a mystery to everyone. A year ago, at a briefing, Bolat Akchulakov, as Minister of Energy, announced that ROSATOM's proposals were being considered as a supplier of the so-called nuclear prison.
There is the People's Republic of China, South Korea, France, and the Russian Federation. We are now choosing from these 4 states. It's not a secret. Today, more than half of the world's power units are built using ROSATOM technology.
Energy shortages are projected to peak in 2050. Already today, 70% of the world's 195 countries are on the brink of survival, including Iran, Turkmenistan, Georgia, and a number of European countries. In my opinion, the economic interest is much more important than the environmental one. Back in 2019, newly elected President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev proposed closing the topic of the nuclear power plant, but 2 years later he raised it himself, saying that the country could not do without the construction of the station. However, today, very little is known about the nuclear power plant project. All we are discussing is that the station can be built on the shore of Balkhash. The cost of the project varies from $6 to $12 billion. Construction may take 10-15 years. As you heard, the majority of residents surveyed are against the construction of the station. If information work had been carried out actively, perhaps people's opinion would have been different now. For example, in Switzerland, 5 or 6 referendums are held a year on important issues. In any case, we will find out all the pros and cons at the referendum. By the way, this will be the 4th in all the years of independence.